what's up, guys? Meteorologist Chris Michaels with meteorologist Elizabeth Gardner. We're talking about what everybody's talking about.
I like to do a lot of wish casting, which is what we joke about, especially
Right.
me. It was so funny. I don't know, it was a couple of weeks ago. And the models, especially the American model, 10 days out, wants to throw up, we just in the Weather Center call a fantasy snowstorm. And I said, man, we haven't had any good fantasy snowstorms in a long time.
Yeah.
And I just happened to start scrolling through. I was like, oh, yes, there's one. So the GFS is kind of doing that again.
Yeah.
It's gone just sort of haywire with the amounts of snow that we could see that doesn't, have any real basis in fact. But you might be seeing it on your phone or, on YouTube because there are people who make their money on social media and YouTube, and they want to catch your attention. And so it's a challenge for us to get you the right message.
And it's going to do that, right? And I mean, you look at the Apple Weather app, and it'll show 17 to 20 inches of snow. And the thing that's tough to explain to people is how these models operate. And that model that is fed into the weather app is only going to show everything that's falling as snow. It's not taking into account the sleet and the freezing rain that we're likely going to see. I would rather it be 12 to 18 inches of snow and not the mess that we're probably going to wind up having. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff that catches people's attention. And I have not a hard time, and I don't know how you feel about this, but you want to get people's attention because this is worth it. But you also don't want to go scaring. So that there's a fine line between preparing people and scaring people. And I think I used to be so against mentioning things days in advance, but I think now the more lead time you have, just to know that there's potential impact, I think is the better.
Well, and there's no way to kind of hold that close to the vest anymore. I've been doing this for a really long time before there was social media and all that. And we could just kind of hold that information because we wanted to release it when we were confident. Here's what it really looks like is going to happen. And we might mention a winter storm, and we're kind of doing that too. We're talking about a winter storm, but we haven't put any numbers out yet because it's changed so much in the last 48 hours too. And it tends to be once you put a message out, you can keep updating it. But once someone's heard it, we're not confident that they're, getting the update. So we just really want it to be right before we, get that message out.
I think there's something to be said for trying to be right instead of trying to be first. Like you'd love to be both. But it's tough because you want to give people what they want. And especially in this day and age, you want anything. You look here, my back's hurting. I would go to the doctor. Now I go to WebMD and it tells me I'm going to die.
Stop.
So, but no, I mean, that's even though you look for an immediate answer, hopefully there's an understanding that immediate answer is not correct. But in this instance, I think we have a lot of transplants in the area. I'm one of them, moved down in 2007. So when we talk about the 2002 ice storm, I wasn't here for that, and there may be people watching this and listening that don't know what we're talking about. And you hope that this is not as bad as that, but there are people who maybe have never seen that much freezing rain and don't know what that looks like, what that feels like.
Yeah, I fully feel like there are a lot of people that don't know what freezing rain really is. And so just for starters, freezing rain is liquid rain that then falls on surfaces like trees and power lines. And eventually that ice starts to build up and it gets heavy and the trees start to break and the power lines start to break. And unfortunately, that's where we're headed with this. And so it may start as some snow and it's going to be, a big difference across the viewing area. The farther south you go, we may see no snow at all. And that we get, some pretty hefty amounts of freezing rain and we see really widespread power outages. I think one of the biggest questions is what's going to happen right around the triangle. And that's what's been really trending, less snow and more ice. Definitely, up toward the Virginia line, it's likely that's going to be more snow and maybe a little bit of ice. But, I think the important job that we have for the next couple of days is to get people to understand what this ice storm really means and how important it is for them to prepare.
And I think as we go through the next few days and the details become a little more clear and everything, and like you've mentioned several times, that the storm of interest is in the East Pacific. And once we get weather balloons and other observations, we'll get a clearer idea of it. There's going to be a lot of different nuances to this. And one of them is going to be, I think, how heavily the precipitation falls down. Because it sounds counterintuitive, but if freezing rain is coming down more heavily, it may not, I mean, it'll stick, obviously, but to me, it seems like if it falls more lightly, it's more likely to stick and make things slick, whereas if it's falling heavily, it may bounce a little bit. And so that's why you see a lot of these doomsday maps, and it's showing 1.5 to 2 inches of freezing rain on some of these models, and it's, well, okay, it's not taking into account other things, different ratios and math that we have to do, and precipitation rates and everything. So it's one of those things that, like, it's enjoyable to forecast because we have a passion for what we do. It's not enjoyable because you know what it can do to people, you know? So it's towing that line is tough too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's different because if we have snow that falls heavily, it tends to really start to pile up. So heavy snow tends to bring us more accumulation because, you know, it's cooling because the snow is frozen. But like you say, freezing rain is just the opposite. You know, I mean, and sometimes we have a super cold raindrop, which is below freezing. But a lot of times that raindrop is above freezing. And so, you know, it has to fall onto the ground and then freeze. And so, you know, if there's a lot of it, it's not going to be able to freeze as quickly. So, you know, but just so people know, it's 1/4 of an inch that starts the power outages. And then if you do keep adding to it, which is certainly possible this time, then, you know, that's when it gets, you know, pretty dangerous. And there's so many moving parts to this, and there always are with a winter system. So you have to have cold air coming in from a high pressure system, and then you have to have a low that comes out of the Gulf or the Atlantic, or else it just doesn't have enough moisture. And so the high has to be just in the right place for it to be cold enough so that when you get that Gulf moisture, which is warm, it can cool it all the way down. And that's a heavy lift. I mean, you think about how warm the ocean temperatures are right now. I mean, off the coast of North Carolina, probably in the low 50s, you know, down in the Gulf, you know, is it mid to upper 50s? And we've got to drop it down to 32 to get all snow. You know, that's not an easy thing to do.
Not around here. No. Almost wanted to just ask this question if we're not running out of time, but what are some things that you do personally, professionally, knowing that this is going to be a marathon for everybody involved, not just for us, but for just what are some things that you do to prepare physically, but then also mentally for the marathon we're going to go through?
This one is extra scary with the potential for how much freezing rain we could get and our chance for power outages, because I did live through the December 2002 ice storm, and it was a mess. I live not too far from downtown, so I thought, you know, oh, okay, we'll be the first to get the power back on. And my neighborhood got it pretty quickly, but not my street. And so we were, you know, maybe a week, and it's winter, and it's hard to deal with. So, first off, earlier I was looking, how much do generators cost? We probably won't go that route, but you know, think about, you know, reaching out to your network of friends. And then once this starts, you know, who has power, who doesn't, you know, or your family. Do you have family in the area? Start thinking about, if you lose power, can you go somewhere? You know, can you afford a hotel? Or are you going to need to, you know, figure out whose house can I go to? There will probably be some shelters that open, you know, if you don't have anybody else's house to go to. Really take this seriously, because you might, you know, none of us wants to move from their house until we have to. But then, you know, if it snows and it's icy and the roads are not passable, there you are at home, and you don't have any way to get anywhere. One more thing I want to mention It's super dangerous if you are trying to heat your house in the wrong way. So a lot of people do get in trouble with carbon monoxide poisoning in
Yeah.
situations like this. So you don't want to be, using a camp stove or, anything inside like that.
Yeah. And these things are, it sounds scary, but it's meant to provide some peace of mind because you may have to pivot. I mean, I'm thinking about being here for 2 or 3 nights, and thank goodness I've got my folks down the road, and I'm like, you cool with taking a cat? So there are little things like that. Pardon me. Went to the store and got more firewood because I have a wood burning fireplace in the event that I do stay home for a night and need to keep it warm. So we're people too, and we have to make these preparations. There's a thread on my Facebook page with hundreds of comments, and people were leaving their advice as to what they do or have done in a situation like this, aside from the whole like bread and milk joke and everything. There were some really good pieces of advice there, and I think that's a good avenue for people to maybe check out, is that there are people who are just trying to help their neighbors, especially those of us who maybe have moved from the West Coast, or there's a lot of folks who have moved into the area from different countries and India and places like that maybe have never experienced this. So this should be interesting in that sense.
Was there one piece of advice that surprised you and you were like, oh, I've never thought of that?
There was, oh gosh, there were a number of pieces of advice, but I think a lot of people were emphasizing generator safety and not having that inside. That wasn't surprising to me. But there were people who were definitely emphasizing that. I saw a bunch of people putting things about ice melt and, just seeing the resourcefulness, I think, of people. And especially on Facebook, it's going to skew toward people who have grown without technology and have had to pivot in the past. So I think it's a useful tool for sure.
Definitely. Well, we have time. Today is Wednesday, and the precipitation arrives on Saturday. So there's still some days to, like you say, get firewood. Think about a generator. I would say borrow one, but I mean, we may have really widespread power outages.
Yeah.
So think about those things that you can do. Do you have a shelter nearby? Do you have friends, family that you can start contacting?
Yeah, and it's best that you think about it now.
Right.
That way you're not making panicked decisions on Saturday.
Yes.
Right before the first flake or freezing raindrop falls, at least you have that mental plan in place. So
before we let everybody go, let's talk about where you can find our information. And we are updating this all the time. I mean, somebody's in the Weather Center almost 24/7. And every time we have a new piece of information, it's on your social media. And we're on all the social media. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on YouTube.
Yeah.
We're everywhere. So find us there. Download our WRAL weather app. We'll have the latest information there. And of course, turn on TV.